see if I can get the... so that's advancing it, is it? No, that's advancing it. Right, okay. So, welcome to Brighton, everybody. I wanted to come and speak here, mainly because my family comes from a little village up the road from here called Stanmer. And if you've got time, after this is over, take a visit. Half of them are buried in that little graveyard there. There's that church. If you go inside, all the carving has been done by various members of my family about 200 years ago. So they were all carpenters, builders, and reeves for the Earls of Chichester. And so I think it's interesting. I could talk for 40 minutes on that if you wish, but maybe not. So me, I've been a tech author now for 13 years, and I've worked in 3 industries: scientific instrumentation and software, bit of telephone billing, and I've now worked for a little company called Numero who do customer service interaction software. So we'll take their emails and Twitter feeds and Facebook feeds, and they all come into a call center. Queries get distributed to the right parts of the right departments. There's customer management. So if you complain on Twitter and you've already complained an email, it'll all come together. They can see the whole conversation. It's marvelous stuff, and I would highly recommend, if any from any large organizations, you buy it. So we do that. I'm also the ISTC Northwest Area Group Coordinator. We've been going about 6 years now, and we have meetings approximately every month. So if you're in the northwest of the UK, I'd highly recommend you come to that as well. We're a very friendly bunch, and we normally get about 4. I'm looking for more. So, and in a previous life, I was a research scientist, so I I've got a varied background. Done UN consultancy in China on potato viruses, things like that. And so why did I want to do this talk? Is that really, I came from a background with the scientific instrumentation of sort of traditional waterfall methods, and I sort of fell into this sort of agile-like development environment where things were a lot quicker. So can we do a quick poll? How many people actually work in what they'd considered an agile environment here now? And how many are still working in what might be considered a waterfall method type environment? Just a few. So we've all, and is that sort of still solely software, or you got sort of engineering reasons to be doing that? It's, yeah. Because that's when I was doing the scientific instrumentation, it was engineering, so you had long things, but you'd end up. We ended up with maybe 3-4 releases a year tops. With Agile, it just gets crazy. We as I've said in the abstract, we get 20 plus releases, patch releases, and incremental releases, major releases. It's just mad. Everything's just so much quicker. So essentially, each documentation piece is a piece of work. Is a much smaller piece of work, and so you have less time to work on it anyhow. So I'm no expert on this, but that's a traditional waterfall method. And it's a quite leisurely paced thing. You can fit your doc process into that quite nicely. You have plenty of time. With something like Scrum, where you might have a sprint for 30 days and these 24-hour scrums, and the iterations are just so much quicker, and you just do not have the time to maybe do everything you'd like to do or what you've used to be able to do. So it's fitting everything in. And with what happens there is, I did this slide a few years ago, but with us we've got, release notes, which is this pointer, yeah, release notes, which we're doing sort of every few weeks. But we've also got various sprints that are going on, which means that we might have a new guide or updates to guides. And so we're having to sort of manage all this while still trying to get release notes out for patches. And the thing my developers do is just throw in an enhancement into a patch release. So we have this sort of very muddy waters sometimes where you're suddenly having to update 3 guides where really the intention was to put out 3 bug fixes, but they just throw in an enhancement for no decent reason, really, as far as I can see. All comes back down to our customer expectations, what customers are asking for. But the other thing they do is that I might be doing, ABC guide, major changes for sprint B there, and I'm expecting it to come out at the beginning of August or something. Well, they say, oh, things are going well on that one. We'll move that forward and put it into this release here. So everything's very fluid. Although they have this sort of roadmap, it changes regularly, easily on a monthly basis, and sometimes sooner than that. So we have to be flexible enough to publish everything we do very quickly and be able to change things as well. So just to give you an idea of where we are, like our worst year in terms of releases was 2011. We had 36 releases, and we seem to be getting things under control. Seemingly 26 and 17. I think we've had another one since. Might have had one today or yesterday. I don't know. So it's going up, but we have to just stay on top of things. But we do get quiet periods. So there's all the releases over, where are we, up to June 14 now, over the last few years. And we do get these peaks here and here. But we do, you can see there's quiet periods where we may be just getting 1 release a month. And we had beginning of 2013 was very strange, where we had a couple of months where we didn't actually have a release. That allowed us to actually do quite a bit of sort of background work, go back over the manuals, check for those typos that you've maybe missed, redo the index, that sort of thing. So we do have time sometimes to do that, but you can't predict when it's going to be, because as you can see, it's very spiky. So put that into numbers. On average, we maybe have a patch release every 2 weeks, an incremental release every 6 weeks, which would maybe include one of those sprints, sometimes 2, and major releases every 18 months, although our last major release was now 2 years ago, so that's maybe, the average is sort of stretching out a bit on that one. And as I said earlier, wrong one again. As I said earlier, the patch releases, they can just throw in a sprint just because one of the customers has said, right, we need this now, and they'll merge that in. I think one of the things we have is a very efficient build process on the development side. So they use Git repository, if anybody's familiar with that sort of thing. I couldn't tell you much about it, but it seems very efficient. They can merge things in and very efficiently build the whole thing up again, get it out to QA, test it, sometimes in a day or less than a day, and then actually do a proper build and send that out to a customer. So, and my main intention is that the documentation doesn't hold up any of that process. So we're trying to produce documentation which we're also checking into the Git repository. So yeah, when I started 5 years ago, we had about 5 guides, and we used to produce those in 3 formats: HTML, PDF, Word, which was a total of 15. We use all for it, but none of what I'm really talking about, it doesn't really matter. I don't think it would sort of what tool you're using. All for it allows me to, as all the others, you can just press a different button in your software if you're using Flare or whatever, and you produce the help or you produce a PDF or whatever. So, but all that takes time, certainly in all for it, because it's running off a database, so which is hosted somewhere else, and some of these things. So the larger guides might take an hour to generate, and if you've got a lot of this stuff, you might be spending a day clicking things, clicking publish, and then waiting, and clicking publish again. We don't do that anymore, but that's what was happening. These days, we've got about 20, so devised a way of getting ebook formats out, so we produce EPUB and Mobi formats. That's using Calibre. I don't know if anybody's come across Calibre. Whereas we use that as a sort of intermediary, and run the output from all for it into that, do the conversion, and then do all that stuff. So we've got in total, we're publishing probably 100 different things. And we also maintain about 6 training guides as well, which also have to be kept up to date with all these changes. So what I realized is that I might have had plenty of time to write in a traditional process, which is, you can see how that might fit quite nicely into the traditional waterfall method. You know, we get our input, we write it, we review it, we write approval, and then we publish it. And I realized that the only way I was going to actually gain any time out of this, because you can't really speed up much of that. You can get quicker review cycles, quicker approval cycles, but the real bottleneck was down in the publish bit there. So, and like if you, there's a whole pile of bottlenecks in there. So we'll just go through that quickly. So if you break down that publish thing, what we were doing all these post-publishing tasks. So we were, wrong one again. So we might be paginating it. I'm sure many people have spent many a happy hour here going through a document and repaginating it, but it does take a long time. For some reason, one thing, you need to know your tool well. And I think, I don't know whether other people have come across this, but certainly what I came into, the previous tech author didn't really know author it very well. And so they hadn't known how to add a cover page. So manually they were adding cover pages after they'd published it. They hadn't worked out how to use the variables in there, so they were adding version numbers in there as well. And they were manually regenerating it, because after you've repaginated, spent out your lovely afternoon repaginating it, you've got to regenerate your TOC, and then you've got to convert it to the PDF. They had a very bad naming convention. They had to rename all these files. And I'll start reinserting and replacing there, because there's a few bugs that Author it has, or did have, certainly in the web HTML. I don't know if again, other people might have this sort of problem, where sometimes you get a weird string of characters and it breaks a search. And so we were having to search through, looking for these weird strings of characters and changing them so the search wouldn't break. And of course, all this takes time. So after we'd done all this, which could take days, we'd copy all this around, we'd copy it onto the intranet, we'd copy it into a code repository, and then we'd check it in. No, that's the wrong one again. So what we'll have to decide what really is good enough, and I think it's a question we all probably ask ourselves. Let's see what I've got here. So I had to come up with strategies to enable me to deliver content when required. And that meant having to make decisions on how long we do pagination and things like that. And I think if you've got confidence in your templates, then you shouldn't have to do any of that. If you see later on there's a problem with pagination, then you go back and look at your templates rather than do the fix then, potentially holding up release. And so that's what we do. And that's the sort of thing we do in those quiet periods on that graph I showed you. So we'd looked at the pagination, as I just said, the content, what is good enough. If you're really rushed, sometimes it might be worth looking at, is just getting out something on the latest sprint good enough, and continuing writing that up over the next couple of weeks, because you know you've always got another release. So the content's never out there for that long before you can actually do something about it. It's not like if you're going back to these waterfall methods where you might have the next release might be 6 months down the line. So we have plenty of opportunity to change it. And so what happens with a lot of things is that, we had an example recently, in fact, that we had to get a release out fairly quickly. Customer wanted it wanted to get their product into UAT. So we got the content out there, and then for the next patch release, we've actually redone it all because of a whole pile of stuff we'd managed to miss, such as the developer just hadn't told me, basically. And they said, oh, I should have told you this. But it didn't really matter because 2 weeks later, we actually were generating the content and delivering that out again. So you basically got the 80-20 rule. If you're happy with 80% of the content, for God's sake, just get it out there. Don't spend the next 3 days messing around with the last 20%. Because, as I said earlier, there's always another release coming up, certainly in my case. So do other people in Agile sort of tend to think that? It doesn't really matter because you know that you're going to get another release. So I'm not the only person here that, yeah. So the other thing we did, we started using a lot of automation. So we're using a lot of macros in the Word file that Author-it churns out to tidy it up. And that was completing all these post-publishing tasks, such as if there were any nasty bits of repagination, you can probably do a macro that accommodates that, regenerates the TOCs, that sort of thing. Make sure all the tables are aligned, all the pictures are aligned. We run about 10 macros now on every publication. And then at the end of that, we create a PDF rather than creating it manually. And then we use batch files to move other files around. So out of Author-it, we can just call a batch file when we publish, and that'll copy the files across the intranet into the code repository. And the other thing you can do is, and I'm assuming you can do this with the likes of Flare and RoboHelp and things. You can run those from the command line. Am I right? Yeah, Alice is nodding. So what we also do is schedule all this to happen overnight. So you can use Windows Scheduler, although I've never actually, I always have problems with that. So I've downloaded another tool, which actually is a lot easier to use. And then, after you've gone home at night, you can have a batch file that is scheduled to run at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. And it'll just run through all your publishing tasks overnight. So you come in the next morning, everything's published. It might have taken 10 hours, but everything's sitting in the right places at the right time. So just to give you an idea what these things look like. So there's a typical batch file. I don't know what people do. Like going back to the search and replace thing with the brackets, I found this sort of, it's a product called GSAR, which is GNU Search and Replace, which is just another command line tool. But you can set it up to search and replace through all your files and find any characters that you don't like. So in our case, it's these angled brackets that seem to do something. So we just get rid of those. And so in this batch file, the first thing it does, this is publishing part of the help, and it searches through the search file to get rid of these. So we're actually not actually doing that in the content. It's just the search file where the problem is. So we haven't actually changed the content. So we're searching through that, changing all the angled brackets. And then we make directories. I think there's another thing that comes up here. This is much easier. I don't know how well people can see this, because what we drive a lot of this through versioning, variables. So that's the P version product variable. So every piece of content is labeled with the version of the software. And each one of these arguments is passed in. So that was the first one, 2, 3. So that X numeratrid P version is making a directory there. And then you can't see the others, but the other ones will be making all these directories based on, in the right places, based on the version number. And then it copies to them using the same variables. So we don't have to change anything. It's just essentially we hit a button and everything's set up to go. And don't know if there's anything else interesting on there, really. Yeah, so I couldn't tell you some of it. I have to look up what all these switches mean. but they do something. I'm not exactly sure what. So, anybody, again, do other people use this kind of sort of batch file publishing to just sort of speed up the whole process and just get the stuff out? There's a few people are nodding. And so we drive all this through these variables, which makes it very easy to update content. Within Author, we just move stuff around, just change every single variable on it, and immediately it's ready to publish. So as soon as you've done any content changes, it's ready to go, and you don't really have to think about it. And this way, you never accidentally overwrite anything, as long as you remember to update the variable in your content management system, in my case. So, yeah, so going back to variables, we do the variables on the version and online and print, whether it's combined or not. So we share a lot of topics with between things. But of course, some of those topics might have an online version or a print version. So we use a lot of image maps. So that's where the online and print comes in. And then, of course, you have topics that might have cross-references between to another topic that actually might not be in all the guides. So we have this sort of variant, if it's combined or not. So if it's a large guide which is combined, all the cross-references are there. If it's not, then they're not there. It gets quite complicated. You just sort of have to know what you're doing. And then we use these variants to manage all the releases. So every piece of content will have a version variant, which is, so you might have version 1, version 2, version 3. But if you don't know when a sprint's been released, you might create a sprint variant, which then you can actually search for. And so when you know which release it's going into, you can actually change all those to the actual release variant. And so we can potentially go back if we had to branch our content. And if you remember, and go back a year and branch off to a version of the content. We can actually potentially do that using our variants now in a very similar way to the way that our coders will branch the software. And so basically, we got that little publish thing down to, we got rid of all the in-betweeny bit, and now we just publish it. We'll do that overnight, run it through a scheduled task, and we just check it in the morning. So there's just a single click as opposed to numerous clicks and messing around. And I've got a note here, actually. One of the things I haven't actually done, but you can do, I'm experimenting with this, is that you can add more things like this. Like, you can send emails to yourself so you can check that it's actually completed. So you have to use PowerShell for that, but you can actually set it up to send an email to your home email account later on in the night to say, oh, we've completed the publishing task. So you even know before you get in the morning that it's done. So what have I learned in the last 5 years in this job that I've been doing? Minimize intervention and maximize automation. And most of all, just don't panic. And it might seem sometimes in this mad agile world that that's all you can do. But if you've got everything well planned and you essentially carry out what I've done there's no reason to panic at all. And there's always that another release just coming up. So in automation, I would say just don't spend time manually doing stuff if you can automate it. And I've put this in, involve yourself, but only when necessary. This is around the sprints. If you've got 4 sprints going, like I'm a sole author, there's another sort of half-time author, but I started off as a sole author. If there's 4 concurrent sprints, while the developers are only doing 1 stand-up a day, if you go and get involved in every single sprint, that's 4 stand-ups a day. It's a waste of time, absolute waste of time. You're better off going to talk to the people later on, finding out what the hell's going on. Sometimes it's worth being in a sprint because there's a lot, if it's content-heavy one, which is changing a lot of content, go along to the things and tell them what you've been doing. But it's just not worth getting in there on every single sprint, and it's worth knowing that. I think I spent a lot of time agonizing at one point whether I should be, and my decision, I think, was the right one. And don't agonize over it. Just get it done. We all know we've got plenty of time later on with new releases. And improve when you can. So in that downtime, just do those things, do the templates, and look at ways where you can add more sort of automation in, more batch files, more variants and variables. There's an amazing amount of stuff you can do with a bit of sort of lateral thinking. So the top tips are, make the best use of your tool. Know it really well. It's worth getting as much out of it as you can. These things are very, very powerful. They don't, I think an awful lot of people would just write in them and they click the publish thing. They never sort of go any more further into the depths of it. But if you do, you'll find they're incredibly flexible, and they'll do an awful lot more than you can actually ever properly imagine beforehand. So automate that tool as much as you can, and minimize those post-publishing tasks. There's always a next sprint, and don't get involved in every sprint. And use your downtime to improve your process and templates, because there will be downtimes. Sometimes the developers get stuck. Certainly our developers get stuck, and suddenly nothing is happening. And then they solve the problem, and it's a mad rush again. So questions? That's me, finished. Yes, Alice. No, the documentation goes out with the product, although we might occasionally be a sprint behind.
Are the developers able to get involved in writing documentation if there's more than you can handle, or is it black box to them?
It tends to be a black box to them. They're quite busy, and you wouldn't want them. They can't write for toffee, can they, really? Let's face it. Does it? Well, my developers can't write. No, actually, some of them are actually quite good. But they're too busy doing other things. Yes?
Have you done anything like use some version of structured authoring in order to actually speed up the process so that you're, say, publishing topics rather than publishing full documents?
No. I'd love to do that sort of thing. It's not that I haven't sort of considered it and seen that I could do that. And that's the problem with Author. When you publish, it can be quite a long publishing task. You might have changed one topic, but to get the whole thing out, it can take a time. But we don't. They're very. They don't like spending money, and so you just know if I went to them and said we need to invest this kind of stuff, that they wouldn't do it.
Can you do it using the tools you have?
Not with what I've got. No. We'd have to go out and spend a little bit, and they wouldn't do it. They haven't even paid for this, for God's sake. Come on. They wouldn't pay for it. Well, that's the one thing they do. We pay about $1,000 a year on the maintenance contract for that. Yeah. I don't know. They'd brought that in beforehand. So.
Do you have to worry about localizing your content?
I worry about it because every now and then they do talk about it. And so it is I have it in mind, and so we try and keep it as simple as possible, keep the word count down, things like that, but not really, no. We have had a little bit done, but not massive amounts. And part of the cost of the Author is actually the localization module that we purchased when we did that little bit of the localization that we did. But they talked about, every now and then, they'll come in and say, could we do Turkish? They think, we haven't even done German properly. and you're wanting to do turkey. But you try and, so, yeah. Anything else? No? Oh yeah, those are my contact details, if you want them. I wouldn't recommend you look at any of that, really. I've got a Twitter account, but I'd never tweet anything interesting. I have occasionally written interesting stuff on my WordPress, but most of that's the family stuff. You know, the Stammer stuff you saw at the beginning? A lot of that's the family stuff. Like my grandfather left, great-great-grandfather wrote a few notebooks, and so we've got, I've transcribed some of that online. But how I convert the stuff through Caliber's on there. So if anybody that's maybe the only interesting thing. And then, LinkedIn, we all have that, don't we?
Just one more question. How many developers, QA engineers do you work with? Wondering what
Yeah, there's 4 QA engineers, and there's about 20, 25 developers. So it's quite a small team, really. Like previous places we've been in hundreds that I've worked at.
You said there's a part-time
There's about 1.5 authors. Yeah. The ratio's not too bad, to be honest. Like, you hear of much worse. Yeah.
All right. If there are no more questions, can I just remind everyone to fill out the feedback forms? I know David likes his constructive criticism.
Do I?
Yes.
All right. No, I actually don't like any criticism at all. No.
I'd just like to thank David very much.
I get no kick from champagne. Mere alcohol doesn't thrill me at all. So tell me, why should it be true? I get a